Mr. Mercer, I know you've had a little time over the lunch break to speak to your legal team and for them to have the opportunity to speak with you about this particular issue. I hope they've had some opportunity to explain to you a number of important facts. The first is that this inquiry, and I am wholly independent of government, of the MOD, of all the equal participants, and that I'm acting with the inquiry purely in the public interest. But I am wholly independent as a serving Lord Justice of Appeal, and I hope that is fully understood. Secondly, my job is to get to the truth of the allegations, one way or the other, as quickly as possible in the public interest. And to do this, I need the cooperation and proactive cooperation of everybody. And for those who come before the inquiry, to tell me everything that they know and not to hold back any detail, whether for their own purposes or because of some misplaced loyalty. Thirdly, I hope they've emphasized to you that the inquiry is very used to dealing with highly sensitive and highly confidential information. Indeed, information of the most sensitive type, which includes the security, the welfare, the well-being, and the confidentiality of witnesses. And indeed, I have already issued numerous restriction orders to that very effect, because I and the inquiry fully appreciate the difficulties that there are, and that it is extremely important that witnesses who come forward, or those who are asked for information or come forward with it, are treated with the utmost care. So you, and indeed everyone, can have complete confidence in the inquiry, and that the information that's given to the inquiry, the names and so on, that are provided to the inquiry in confidence, will be treated in confidence by me and the inquiry team, and with the very greatest care. There is nothing for you or anybody to worry about when they come forward. And as you will have heard this morning, the inquiry has set up a number of extremely secure methods of individuals getting in touch with the inquiry direct, and many have already. This has been, I know, a busy day with lots of questions and lots of evidence. And I'm prepared, because I want to get on with the rest of your evidence today, to give a little bit more time for you to discuss these issues, in particular to discuss these important points that I have made just now, and which I would like you profoundly to understand, and indeed everyone who gets in touch with the inquiry and responds indeed to my further call for evidence, that they can have complete confidence in the integrity of the inquiry, the desire of the inquiry to take the utmost care with all those who come forward and their well-being, but also to have no doubt as to the determination of the inquiry to get to the bottom of these allegations as quickly as possible, one way or the other, true or untrue, in the public interest, so that I can make any recommendations that need to be done and that everybody can move on. So I'm going to park this issue briefly. I'd like you to have some further discussions with your legal team and for them to have discussions with you about this. It is a very, very sensitive, difficult issue that I am dealing with, And I want everybody to understand that I fully appreciate the emotions involved, the camaraderie involved, all these other issues, some of which you've touched on this morning, if I may say so, very eloquently. But it is very important that everybody has faith in the inquiry's ability and my ability to get to the bottom of this with all due speed. And that's why you must all trust me in the inquiry to handle what you tell us and tell me carefully and with great confidence. And there are mechanisms which I will set in train, whether it's another closed hearing or whether it's some other hearing, that you can speak to me and the inquiry team with your lawyers present in a completely secure surrounding. We've got quite a lot of the rest of your very detailed statement to go through. So unless there's anything that you'd like to say to me now or your counsel would like to say, that is how I'd like the position to lie for the moment. But I would like this issue to be dealt with, please, as rapidly as possible, because it is important that this inquiry proceeds at pace. There are a lot of allegations flying around, and as long as they are flying around, they are corrosive to everybody who might have a cloud hanging over them. So that is why I am very, very keen to secure the cooperation and confidence of everybody who comes before me. All right?
Sir.
Thank you. Mr. Glasgow.
Please, you, sir. Mr. Mercer, so that we are not confused about the evidence you gave before lunch, can I please check with you that the three people you've discussed matters with that you'd mentioned to us were the Chief of Defence Staff, is that correct?
Yep.
The Director of Judicial Engagement.
Yep.
And the Secretary of State.
Yep.
So Director of Judicial Engagement was Peter Ryan.
Yep.
Chief of Defence Staff, was that Sir Nick Carter?
Yep.
And the Secretary of State, of course, was Ben Wallace at the time.
Yep.
As part of your assurance to them that you would get to the bottom of what had happened, what did you decide to do?
Well, initially I engaged with Peter Ryan, Director of Judicial Engagement, and from him sort of flowed a series of requests for meetings, and that was included but not limited to Provost Marshal Navy, John Murphy, who was an external sort of Chief Constable Auditor of the inquiry, Director Special Forces, individuals like that.
Provost Marshal Navy, why did you speak to Provost Marshal Navy, please?
Because as I understood it, he was the sort of senior rank dealing with this.
And when you say with this, do you mean
with the whole with both Northmoor and the sort of complaints more broadly? Because there was always the issue that I understood Northmoor when it was initially set up was looking at issues from 2014 onwards or 2013 onwards, and I was under the impression that two cases in particular that have been JR'd in this case were outside of that envelope. There was always that element of confusion as to whether they were in that envelope or outside that envelope. That question was never really answered to me, but Provost Marshal Navy was the sort of chief, card holder for investigating these issues, as I understood it at the time.
And were you reassured, following your conversations with him, about the investigation that was being undertaken?
Well, I was. I mean, I had a very public run-in with his predecessor during the inquiry into the Iraq Historical Allegations team because I felt that they were unprofessional. I felt that they had made matters worse, and essentially there was a level of incompetence that I wasn't prepared to accept. I was pleased to see the new Provost Marshal Navy in. Highlights of the conversation are hard to recollect. I'm sure there must be a note of it somewhere, but I asked him what he thought of the allegations, and to best of my recollection, he sort of said they had been investigated. At no stage was I made aware of what subsequently came out, that, for example, people were arrested and cases went to the Service Prosecuting Authority. That was never mentioned in those meetings.
Let's deal with what was mentioned rather than what wasn't
Yeah.
mentioned. Did he reassure you that matters had been investigated?
He reassured me that they had been investigated. I did not feel reassured.
Right. So he assured you they had been investigated,
Yeah.
but you were not reassured by his words.
Yes.
Did he give any assessment to you as to whether there was any truth in the allegations that he said had been investigated?
I mean, very much. I don't have a lot of recollection of that meeting, but it was very much he was doing his job. You know, I would never question his professionalism or integrity, and they had been investigated, and that there was kind of nothing more to say on the matter. I didn't at that stage pick apart the different individual sort of technical reasons as to why I was concerned with him. To the best of my recollection, that was more with John Hawke. That was more with John Murphy.
So insofar as there was any assurance from Provost Marshal Navy, the assurance was that matters had been investigated.
Yeah.
And that there was nothing more to see here. Does it come to that?
Essentially, but I felt like he was saying that because he'd done his job, right? It wasn't. It didn't give me a warm, fuzzy feeling. When you're dealing with soldiers, you know, and sailors and airmen and women, you can tell if that's the end of the conversation, right? And it didn't give me a sort of warm fuzzy as to what was going on. But in a way, that didn't matter to me because I was then going to go to Hawkins and DJEP and DSF anyway. So
let's just deal with the other people with whom you spoke. You spoke to the Director of Special Forces.
I did.
And did that person give you an assurance that the allegations had been looked into?
Yes, I had a detailed conversation with him.
And did the Director of Special Forces give you any assurance as to whether there was or was not any truth in the allegations that had been investigated?
He didn't have the professional curiosity I expected him to have.
We'll deal with his lack or presence of professional curiosity in a moment. What I asked you was, did he give you any assurance that the allegations that had been investigated were or were not true?
It wasn't so much as were or were not true, is that there wasn't any evidence that they could find. So it wasn't professed an opinion, Minister, these are not true, or Minister, these are true. There is no evidence of this. There is no evidence to back up these claims, and this was the very crux of the problem.
When you had your conversation with the Chief of the General Staff, who must have been Mark Carson-Smith?
So, Chief of Defence Staff.
No, your statement records the Chief of the General Staff. Would you like to look at paragraph 22, Mr.
Oh, sorry,
Wilson?
I thought we were talking about the initial conversations.
No, we weren't. We've moved on from there. It's
Okay.
my fault. You were telling us about the conversations you'd had with people after your initial conversations.
Right,
One
okay.
with Provost Marshal Navy,
Yep.
another with the Director of Special Forces, and
Yep.
the third with Chief of the General Staff.
Yep.
It must be Mark Carlton-Smith.
Correct, yeah.
Right. Did Mark Carlton-Smith assure you that the allegations had been looked into?
If I'm completely honest, I can't recollect what Mark Carlton-Smith said to me.
Well, how about looking at the last sentence of your paragraph 22, because you were completely clear when you wrote that statement and signed it in November last year. During all of my conversations with the Director of Special Forces and Chief of the General Staff, I was assured that the allegations had been investigated and were untrue.
Yeah, that's true, but the very
I'd hope so,
particular nature of the conversations, I can't recall. But that broad summation of them is true and accurate.
Again, Mr. Mercer, I'd not asked you for the detail of the conversations. I'd simply asked you of two things.
Well, you're asking me for specific words, aren't you? You're saying, did this individual say to you this is not true? And I'm saying to you, I don't recall the specifics of that. But during all of my conversations, the broad reflection of that was that I was assured the allegations had been investigated and were untrue.
So your takeaway from your discussions with the Director of Special Forces and Chief of the General Staff was the allegations had been looked into and they were untrue?
Yes.
And did that set your mind at ease?
No.
Why not?
Because in the course of those conversations, I had asked specific questions as to why there was no evidence to disprove these allegations.
Well, there's a difference between no evidence to disprove and untrue. So let's just clear. They assured you the allegations were untrue. In other words, there was no truth in them.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So having spoken to the Director of UK Special Forces and the Chief of the General Staff, both of whom separately told you this has been looked at and there's no truth in the allegations, you did not have a warm and fuzzy feeling.
No, because that wasn't the only aspect of the conversation. So during that conversation, we talked about a number of issues around the actual investigation. I remember this specifically with DSF, less so with CGS, Mark Harton-Smith, but I remember specifically with DSF, we had specific conversations about the recording of evidence of these operations where there would have been opportunities to disprove these allegations that did not now exist, and that made me feel very uncomfortable because there was no plausible reason for that evidence not to exist.
You had discussions with representatives from Operation Northmoor. If it helps, look at the first sentence of paragraph 22. I received a briefing from officials in relation to Operation Northmoor.
Yeah, not representatives from Op
So you didn't speak to anyone from Op Northmoor?
I don't remember doing that, but it says here I received a briefing from officials in relation to Op Northmoor. That's what happened. DJEP.
Did you speak to Sir John Murphy, who was providing?
Yeah, but he was an independent chief constable brought in for
external advice.
Yeah, so he wasn't part of it.
Did you want to speak with people directly involved in the investigation to satisfy yourself, as you've been asked to do by the Secretary of State, that there was nothing to see here?
I think I'm not sure that would have been appropriate because they wouldn't have been able to answer my very specific questions around evidence. So, would it have been useful? Probably. But as a minister, you expect to be able to deal with the kind of heads of sheds of these different lines of command. For example, DJEP and Provost Marshal Navy and CGS and CDS and DSF, and have that integrity in that process without having to then backpick into those organisations. And I think that was a fair assessment to make.
So at the time that you left your various meetings, do I understand that you were still of the view that there was something to investigate with Op Northmoor and that there might be truth in the allegations?
Something to investigate with Northmoor. I came away from those meetings with very serious concerns about why evidence that I had asked to see, or any evidence indeed, that would help us disprove these allegations did not exist. That was the specific point of my concern.
Did you go back to the Secretary of State and say, I've met with a number of people, I've tried to get to the bottom of the position, I've been told there's nothing to see here, but I have very real concerns?
I said I did not believe DSF and CGS.
when you told the Secretary of State that you didn't believe the Director of Special Forces or the Chief of the General Staff, what did you tell him you didn't believe in what they'd said to you?
I told him that I did not believe there was nothing there. I told him that I did not believe their account as to why there was no full motion video of any of the 10 operations that had been selected at random by John Murphy. I did not believe the accounts of the call-out procedure and the behaviour of detainees on target that was recounted again and again and again, and I did not believe that no one could remember any of the operations that they'd been asked. And as an integrity shout, being asked to sign that off, I didn't believe them. So maybe my fault, but I didn't believe them, and I couldn't believe them, and my integrity wouldn't allow me to say that I did.
So your take back to the Secretary of State was that, having been tasked by him to get to the bottom of this, you could not agree with what you were being told and you wouldn't sign off on it as accurate.
Correct. I think my words were something stinks.
And when you advised the Secretary of State that the allegations that were being made about UKSF-1 were in effect not being looked at properly, what was his response, if any?
So the Secretary of State was concerned, but the Secretary of State was certainly, I guess, we had a testy relationship at times, but I felt we kind of balanced each other out quite well. He was certainly more of the view that, well, there is no new evidence, Johnny. There is no new evidence. This has been thoroughly investigated. And that wasn't the point I was making. The point I was making was very clear in that there should be something to refute these allegations, just something to refute these allegations. The absence of anything is what pricks your conscience. It's like when you're it's hard to explain, right? But when you're in Afghanistan, you're looking for IEDs, okay? You're looking for the presence of the abnormal and the absence of the normal, to understand what's going on, to try and ascertain where these things are all the time. And that's what happened with this. There was the absence of the normal and the presence of the abnormal.
Did you ask to be provided with something to show you the source of the allegations?
I did.
In other words, you wanted to know how it was that UKSF-1 were being accused of engaging people on target when they didn't pose a threat.
I did.
When you asked to be shown the evidence, what was the response?
A note was brought up to my office with an official. I was made to sign some.
For a moment,
I'm so sorry.
It's my fault. Can I just check? Did you ask once or more than once before the note arrived?
Oh, I had to press the point. Yeah, I had to press the point. As you can see from before lunch, I was trying to be gamed out of this, right? So I had to ask a number of times.
So you asked a number of times, and someone came to your office. And
Eventually, an individual came to my office, a senior official. I had to sign a bit of paper, and then I was shown this. It was essentially a piece of paper. So it's actually there's a.
You'll find it in Divider 1 if you're looking.
Thank you. There's a version of this note in Divider 1, but it wasn't in that format. When I saw it, it was printed off on what I would describe as a Word document. That is military staff writing. It wasn't in that format, but it broadly said pretty much the same thing.
Can I again interrupt you for a moment so that others who are trying to follow, the exhibit reference of the document I've just directed your attention to is the MOD Exhibit 198-000-1587. That's 198-000-1587. The document's been brought up on the screen. You have a hard copy available to you in tab 1. And if I've just understood what you said, the text that you looked at is not the same format as what we have here, but the content is the same.
Correct.
Right. Now, it's a document that's dated in the top left. If we just scroll up, I'm so sorry. 5th of April 2011. Identified for the attention of the DSF, Director Special Forces. And then if we look to the body of the text, which you're familiar with, allegations of EJK by UKSF, so allegations of extrajudicial killing by UK Special Forces. My apologies for not raising this with you during my leaving call, but I was still formulating my thoughts and our truncated meeting didn't seem the right moment. And I'm going to pause for a moment and just check this. At the bottom of the document, there is the cipher for the individual who wrote this note, which is N1785, the commanding officer of UK SF3. And I see you've opened the gist sheet. Can I please don't say any name at all, Mr. Mercer? The version that you looked at, did it have a name on it?
Of course.
And does the name accord with the name that's alongside the cipher for N7185? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, that is the same.
1785, thank you. I
That's
got
the
the
correct
numbers the
name.
wrong way round. Thank you.
That's correct.
So, and then we'll begin again at paragraph 2. I have for some time been aware of rumours within UKSF3 that UK SF1 subunits have been conducting summary executions of supposed Taliban affiliates on target in Afghanistan. I'll pause whilst you look at something else. I don't want to read on.
No, that's fine. Please go ahead.
Until very recently, I've not reported this any further and cautioned my team against peddling malicious speculation. However, I've now been given more information of a nature which makes me seriously concerned for the reputation of UKSF. One of my team, an officer, has been told by an individual from UKSF1 that there is, in effect, an unofficial policy amongst the UKSF1 subunits to kill, wherever possible, fighting-aged males on target, regardless of the immediate threat they pose to our troops. In some instances, this has involved the deliberate killing of individuals after they've been restrained by the subunit and the subsequent fabrication of evidence to suggest a lawful killing in self-defence. What I've been told does not amount to anything as substantial as evidence, but to my sense, it is more than just what had been, until recently, vacuous rumour. But if UKSF individuals are conducting EJKs, then the implications are clearly stark. Notwithstanding this, I feel most strongly that thorough, appropriate investigation is warranted. To be frank, I do not know what to do next, and to that end, I'd welcome your assessment on how you think we should proceed. I'm sorry to have to bring this to you at what is already such a busy time. Rest assured, I have only been aware of this issue for several days, not longer, and that I feel I needed to pass on my concerns before I leave post as Commanding Officer UKSF3 and before I assume command of SFHQ Afghanistan.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Yep.
This document, written in April of 2011, was shown to you for the first time, certainly either in 2019 or possibly early 2020.
Yeah, about that time.
So you now have seen a document from the commanding officer of UK SF3 written to the Director of Special Forces, which records in the body of that document that he, the commanding officer of UK SF3, has been made aware of an allegation reported by an officer to the effect individuals are being engaged on target when they pose no threat.
Yes.
And also it would appear that there's been a fabrication of evidence.
Yes. Well, that's what it says.
That must have chimed with the information that you had received from the people whose identities you don't want to disclose.
Indeed.
And in particular, it chimed with a number of different strands. First, the engagement of individuals who pose no threat.
Yep.
Second, it engaged the allegation that something might have been done in the aftermath to cover this up.
Yep.
You've spoken about the changes to documents and the like.
Yep.
And also it possibly chimed with the information you'd had from somebody firsthand that they had been asked to carry a throwdown which you understood might be used to plant on the body of a deceased to in some way justify that person's killing.
Well, the fabrication of evidence to suggest a lawful killing is very broad. There's many things you can do.
But
those are two of the ones that have been brought to my attention.
So on reading this document, it immediately chimed with information you had received from friends and from trusted sources, and it also echoed the pallor and the odour that you had become aware of at a time when you had been trying to join UKSF.
Correct.
So in and around the end of 2019, early 2020, you now have a document from the commanding officer of UKSF 3 which echoes information you've been receiving for a period of about 12 years.
Yes.
And prior to the reading of this document, you had no confidence in those conducting the investigation. They lacked the intellectual curiosity, you told us.
Firstly, it was 8 years. It was 8 years that I started, before I started hearing these from 2012 through to 2020. Clearly, I mean, this letter reinforced those concerns, but again, touched on the requirement to separate rumour from fact.
If I've got the dates wrong, it's my fault. I thought you told us that you first became aware of the odour or pallor in 2008 and 9.
No, it was after that.
My misunderstanding then. So, for a period of 8 years, you've been receiving allegations from trusted sources.
Yeah.
And now you have a document in your hands which completely echoes those allegations, but it's written by the commanding officer of UKSF 3 and sent to the Director of Special Forces.
Yeah.
So if there hadn't been a warm, fuzzy feeling up until now...
This wasn't going to help.
It wasn't going to help.
No.
Things had gone particularly frosty.
Yes, they'd gone south.
And as they went south, presumably... you were extremely angry at the fact you had not been shown this before.
I was I was disappointed because this was fairly on in my tenure as Min DPV, and I wanted to go in there with a sort of clean book and try and help out as part of the team to deal with this stuff one way or the other. Not to cover it up, not to prosecute it, but just find out what happened. And it was clear to me, you know, when I was shown things like this, that I wasn't being shown the whole picture. And as the minister, clearly that then is a bit of a confidence shatterer in your own department. So, I was annoyed because I felt that when you go into a department, it's kind of a watershed line. And you campaign, all your campaigning as a backbencher and so on that you have to do to get national strategic change in this country. That's one period of time. You then enter the department and it's a new start. But this clearly was not a new start. And so, yes, I was disappointed.
Did you speak to the Secretary of State about this?
So my conversations with the Secretary of State were often informal because it was very hard to get time to see him. But I would at regular, so when if I'm honest, I can't remember a specific moment where I went in with this letter and I said, here's this letter. But I remember speaking to him about this on numerous occasions as the evidence began to build up that there was something not right. And I imagine I would have done so after that letter, yes. But it literally involved knocking on his door. Ben, have you got a set? Usually he's busy doing something else. And I was like, look, this is not good.
Presumably it's too important and can't wait.
Well, that was my view, but I think I placed higher importance on this than anyone else. And that's understandable because, you know, Defence Secretary dealing with Ukraine and all the rest of it. And this was, you know, I very much knew that there were people out there trying to sully my name around vexatious litigation and legislation. And so clearly, you know, something like this is going to be pretty important to me.
And if, of course, this is true, it does no end of harm to you and the cause that you've been trying to fight.
Yeah, it's horrific.
So what did... I'm so sorry, you were
No.
So what inquiries did you undertake? Because the Secretary of State has asked you to get to the bottom of what's going on.
Yep.
And you now find that despite assurances that everything's been investigated and the allegations are untrue, there is in existence a letter from the commanding officer of UKSF3 which accuses UKSF1 of committing executions.
Sure, but those two things are not mutually exclusive, right? Because this, in a terms, the scheduling of this, he could have raised these issues, which he has, and then there could have been an investigation, and then that could have been the end of it. So yes, the two are not mutually exclusive and don't contradict each other. I'm not suggesting you're suggesting they do, but that's my view.
But presumably you wanted to satisfy yourself that this had been investigated and it wasn't true.
Of course.
So presumably you got hold of the Director of Special Forces and said, I've just been shown a top secret memo. I need to speak to you about this. Can I have 5 minutes in your diary?
I don't know why you would presume that. I mean, I was working my way through a series of meetings, and this was one of the presentations of evidence that was shown to me. I didn't get this piece of evidence and then suddenly go around demanding a meeting with DSF and CDS. I just read this piece of evidence. I was concerned, but I knew I had these other meetings coming up, and I banked it in my mind, and I continued in a professional manner.
Did you ever ask the DSF about this memo?
I didn't ask him. I asked the senior official, who I can give you his cipher. So if his name is in black, I'm allowed to say his name, right?
Can I check which of the tabs you're looking at?
I'm looking at tab 2.
Thank you. Yes, you can.
Great. So the individual who showed me the document was Mr. Dominic Wilson. And I asked him, what is going on with this? And he expressed the frustration that, sort of written it down.
He expressed frustration that this had been written down.
Yeah. Sorry, sir.
The memo we've just been looking at had been written down.
Sorry, sir.
He expressed frustration that the memo
had been written down.
DSF had been written down.
Correct, sir.
It's the memo to DSF, sir, not the memo of DSF.
To DSF had been written
sir,
down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So can I just check something? I do apologise for turning my back. It's a little earlier than I planned, but I think now might be a convenient moment just for a very short break. Can I make it clear that when we have the break, I'm just going to. Mr. O'Connor is as ever ahead of me. When we have the break, could we deal with the transcript, because at the present moment there is a delay and we need to check that something is removed from the transcript. And I'm sorry, it's my fault and no one's else's.
No, it's my fault.
If it can be dealt with now, then we can move swiftly on to the rest of the evidence.
Indeed, thank you. A point has been raised regarding the transcript. Before I rise, I'd like to remind everyone that in these circumstances, as I rise, everything that has been said in the last 10 minutes of this hearing is now subject to a provisional restriction order, which I now make, pending any further direction, which I now indicate to you. That means that anything said during that period, i.e. From 21 minutes to 3, must not be repeated or otherwise communicated or tweeted until further direction. Any breach of my order may be punished by imprisonment. This live feed will now stop, and I will rise briefly so that a short, restricted hearing can occur if necessary, or discussion between counsel, and that hearing will only be attended by state core participants and subject matter experts if necessary, so that a discussion can take place whether restricted information has been disclosed, and if so, what I should do about it. Once we've concluded that discussion, everybody will be allowed to return to this room. They probably need a break because it's getting slightly warm. This live feed will recommence only when I indicate that that should be done. At the outset of that resumption, I will confirm whether there's been any reference to restricted evidence in open hearing, and if so, the restriction order over the previous 10 minutes of this hearing will remain in place. I hope that's all clear. We'll take a short break. Thank you. Clear the call.
I generally regard it as not the first time.
No more than usual.
Never, well, that's okay. I like a solid continuation of stupidity.
Mr. Glasgow, I gather that a particular name was mentioned at 14:46:44 in the transcript, inadvertently, of course. I order that that name be removed from the transcript.
Thank you, sir.
And be replaced with the cipher 1785. My restriction order remains in place in relation to that name. The transcript will be published in due course.
Insofar as the temporary restriction order was imposed over the entire 10-minute period, do we take it that that's now been lifted, save insofar as it relates to the name that's been replaced by the cipher?
Indeed, it's been, I lift it and replace it with the specific restriction order in relation to the name at 14:46:44.
Sir, thank you very much.
All right, anything else I need to do?
No, thank you, sir.
But well, these things, since happen from time to time, I'm grateful for everybody dealing with it quickly. I gather the intention is now to try and sit to finish, and I'm very happy to take a second break later on.
Sir, thank you very much indeed.
But let's see how we go, shall we?
To indicate to Mr. Mercer, who wasn't party to any discussion, the idea is that we'll sit from now to about 4 o'clock, have another short break, and then to sit through until just before 5 in the hope that we can finish your evidence today. I'm sure that's something that you would prefer. If it becomes very obvious that I'm not going to do that, I won't hold everyone here till 5 o'clock. I'll make it clear much earlier than that.
I think the gate shut at 5, so that's an incentive, and I'm sure that you, Mr. Mercer, would like to finish today. So we'll do everything we can to do that.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
I should make it clear, of course, that there'll still be the issue that you've been asked to reflect on.
Yes, of course.
So that's an entirely separate matter outside of the evidence
Yes.
that I'm asking you about now. Now then, Mr. Mercer, you told us before we had the short break that having asked on a number of occasions for the source of the allegations, and in particular who had first raised them, that you were then shown the document at your tab 1 that I took you through.
Yeah.
I'd asked you whether you then raised the content of that document with either the DSF, with the Chief of the General Staff, or indeed with the Secretary of State. You'd said that you believe you would have spoken to the Secretary of State, although he was difficult to get hold of because he was very busy. Is that fair?
Yes.
That, do you remember whether you did or did not raise it with the Director of Special Forces?
I can't remember if I raised the note. I raised a lot of issues with him. I can't specifically remember the note.
And did you raise the note with the Chief of General Staff, Mark Carlton-Smith?
Same answer.
Other than being shown that one document, were you shown any other documents in response to your request what the source of the allegations was?
No.
Did you ask whether it was possible to see any of the full motion video of the detention operations?
I did.
Why did you believe there would be full motion video available for you to review?
So, as I understood it, in terms of auditing up Northmoor and some of these allegations, Chief Constable John Murphy had selected 10 operations at random, and he was informed that there was no FMV available for any of those 10 operations. Now, full motion video became a statutory requirement to conduct these operations after a particular operation in believe it was around 2006 that didn't go too well. It is literally a go, no-go criteria. There will be a number of platforms that have additional FMV capabilities assisting operations like this. It was simply not plausible to try and ask me to believe that there was nothing available for each of these 10 operations selected at random.
Insofar as full motion video is a go or no-go requirement, as you've just described it, what was your understanding of what happens to the full motion video at the end of an operation?
Well, look, you have to, firstly, there's the way it comes into the operations room. It's piped in through one of the feeds. When I was there, we then recorded it onto a subsequent device at the same time, so that if we were monitoring a target and you think you've seen something, you can then go back to your secondary tape, rewind it, and check what you've actually seen. For example, a handover of something, or individuals travelling in cars and so on. You needed to be able to go back and look at that. So there were those 2 copies in the ops room. Secondarily, I would have to prepare what are called storyboards and so on, and they would have video clips in them to assist in the kind of explanation of the operation in post-operational reports.
Who was it who told you that the full motion video was not available?
John Murphy.
Did you raise with him the matters that you've just given in evidence, namely that your understanding was that it was a go or no-go requirement and that it would be separately recorded on at least one, if not more than one device?
I did. I raised that with him. I raised that with Secretary of State, and I raised that with Director of Special Forces.
Dealing with each of those in turn then, when you raised those concerns with Sir John Murphy, who was one of the independent assessors for Operation Northmoor, what, if any, response did he give to you?
He said, I can't do anything about that. That's as far as I can go.
Did he appear to share your concerns, or did he appear to have accepted the explanation that the full motion video was not available?
He appeared to accept the explanation that full motion video was not available for any of the 10 operations he selected at random that he asked to have a look at.
When you raised that with the Secretary of State, the same questions, please. What, if any, was the reaction of Ben Wallace when you told him about
He
the full motion
repeatedly
video?
told me that there was no new evidence. I said to him that it is not a plausible explanation to me to say that we have no FMV, or that the FMV is in America, or we are unable to retrieve any FMV of any of these 10 operations selected at random that could help us understand the atmospherics, the sort of type of operation and the tactics and the techniques and procedures that were being used in that operation. The idea that none of that existed was a significant concern to me. The Secretary of State, he's a busy man. I don't think he really understood the gravity of that.
When you say he didn't understand the gravity of it, what you think that Ben Wallace didn't understand the seriousness of your suggestion that there must be full motion video available, therefore the claim it doesn't exist is implausible?
Yeah, I don't think he understood the gravity of that.
Did he offer any reason to you why he accepted the explanation, as you appear to suggest he did do, that full motion video was not available?
No. Sorry, no.
No, I'm so sorry, I didn't hear.
No, I'm sorry.
I apologise. Can I ask about the conversation or conversations you had about this subject with the Director of Special Forces?
Yeah, I mean, I said to him, where is this stuff? I want to bat for you. I want to help you. Where is this stuff? I remember he leant back and went like that.
So apart from leaning back and apparently shrugging his shoulders and holding his hands out, did he offer any explanation to you as to where this material was?
It's not available, Johnny.
Did you press him on that?
I made clear to him that it wasn't plausible. It was not a plausible explanation to me.
And when you told the Director of Special Forces that what he was saying to you was not plausible, what, if anything, was his response?
I seem to remember they started challenging me on, because he was with another individual who was a senior enlisted rank within UKSF, sort of challenging me on whether or not whether or not FMV was a go or no go criteria, which it was. And then, there was an attempt to sort of challenge as to why I'd be interested in this. And I kept repeatedly saying that I wasn't interested in, I understand the nature of these operations, and you're not going to see, for want of a better phrase, a smoking gun and something happening, but you can get a generic feel for an operation and what's going on. I wanted to see that in order to, have the integrity to stand in the House of Commons and stand up for him and his unit.
To your mind, was the full motion video a potentially important piece of evidence that might point in favour or against the honesty and accuracy of the allegations that were being made?
Of course, it's absolutely critical.
So, the most critical?
If it was my unit, and there was no FMV available for 10 operations selected at random by an external chief constable, I'd have ripped the place apart to find out what was going on. Because if they're not telling me the truth on that, what else are they not telling me the truth about? It is not plausible to tell me that nothing exists. There are all sorts of other things you can say, but you can't tell me it doesn't exist, because it exists somewhere.
So when the Secretary of State, Chief of the General Staff, and the Director of Special Forces each told you the same thing that was, in your opinion, completely implausible, did you place any faith in anything else they told you?
Well, no. I mean, look, I don't believe people lie to me as a minister. I don't believe people lie and get out of bed in the morning to do wrong and cover up. I am still surprised to this day that there wasn't that intellectual curiosity or command curiosity to find out what had been going on. Because for me, in the military, you have all this, people go on about values and standards and integrity and all this stuff, right? But it's precisely for these reasons, so that you know everything, you know what's going on. It's about you have to be able to trust each other and trust what's going on in the system. And the truth is, that trust was broken at that stage, yeah. And I then struggled to believe much more of what was said around the issue.
Leaving aside the question, therefore, of whether you did or did not place any trust in what was being said to you about the issue,
yeah.
You've been asked by the Secretary of State to get to the bottom of the situation. Did you continue to do that?
Yeah, I did. So let me just get the timelines right in my head. I did a number of things. I looked at the procedures that were operated on target, and something called the call-out procedure. I became aware, I'm not sure how I became aware of it, but I became aware of the sort of TTPs that were used on target by that unit. And again, this was the slow. So that initial, there's no FMV available, to me, was the alarm bell. That's when, right? And then a series of creeping things happen. Another one is the TTP, and asking me to believe a series of unbelievable events that happened a number of times, unbelievable behaviours from detained personnel in Afghanistan. Well, I'm not going to believe them anyway, but certainly on top of having no FMV available, I'm not going to believe them. And then all these things build up into a position where you're like, you guys are not telling me the truth.
And insofar as you were conducting your own inquiry or investigation, other than looking at documentation that you requested to look at, did you speak to individuals? And can I give you this assurance at the moment? I'm not about to ask you to name somebody. So did you speak to any individuals for their assistance in understanding what might or might not have happened?
Of course.
And did you speak to members within the SF community?
Of course.
Did you reach out to your own contacts?
Yes.
And therefore you had conversations with people you know
Yes.
about the concerns that you then had. And was this with a view to trying to get to the truth?
It was all about getting to the truth. It was all about getting to the truth. I've always, you know, I mean, we can come on to this later, but all I'm interested in is the truth. I think, you know, at this juncture, you know, when listening, you know, as we go down this path and you look at certainly what's happened in Australia and so on, I think, you know, there's, you know, I think you're going to struggle to get to a place where it's kind of like black and white, right? But it's all these different issues. And what I was doing, I was never able to get to a place where I met a guy and he said, I did this. But in the real world, that's never going to happen. All that will happen is someone might find God in 20 years. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. So what I had to do was build this picture of what was going on and try and understand in my mind, with all those different experiences that I'd had up to that point, from fighting in Afghanistan to operating with to fighting lawfare to bringing legislation into the House of Commons, trying to understand what I thought had happened.
I can assure you.
That's what it did.
I can assure you, Mr. Mercer, it is going to happen.
Good.
If I have anything to do with it.
Just dealing with some of the areas of concern that you identified in your witness statement, and can I take you to them,
Sure,
to help you? We've dealt with the question of the full motion video and your obvious refusal to accept the implausible accounts you've been given as to its absence.
Do you mind just giving me a paragraph number?
Of course I will. I'm going to turn to look together to paragraph 27. You'll find that on page 10, and I'll let you find your place.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm ready to go.
In terms of the nature of the allegations that were being made and the explanations, you record in this paragraph that in addition to the absence of any full motion video, there were other aspects to the allegations as I understood them at the time that I found concerning. There was the detail and the specific way they were presented, along with the implausibility of the explanations that alarmed me. Can I have your help, please, with Mr. Mercer, with what you actually mean by that? What was the detail and the specific way in which the allegations were presented?
Sure.
And what was the implausibility of the explanations?
Sure. So the way these individuals, the post-operational reports were indicating these individuals had died was that that would arrive on target, would secure the location, do a call-out procedure in order to get people out of the compound so you didn't have to go into it, and then take back in what we would know as perhaps the main individual we're looking at. I'm just looking, I don't want to break the rules again about what I can and can't say. But there's a cipher attached to the main individual we would go out looking for on these operations, right? So you would use him or her to initiate a call out, to then take that individual back in and suggest that individual who knows the game is up and has, you know, then pulls out a grenade or steps behind a curtain and pulls out a weapon and starts taking on an entire subunit. What was it, 14 times? Is not plausible. I've never seen that behaviour myself. I've never heard of that behaviour myself. And to be asked to believe it time and again is frankly a bit of an insult to those of us who operated in the same way. So there was that issue. There was the issue of this particular procedure of calling out the main individual, getting everyone out of the compound, taking them back in, and claiming they suddenly decided to get a weapon or grenade and start taking on the entire. Right? It's never going to happen. So, obviously, once or twice, you're like, that doesn't sound right. 14 times, obviously, something's going on. The idea they could do that whilst under control, under detention, again, is just not credible. You know, and I'm so sorry that I can't sit there and say, yeah, okay, I can understand how you can handcuff a guy and he can go back in and start fishing around for a weapon and come out guns blazing, so you've got no other alternative than to shoot this guy in the head. But I can't do that because it's not true.
And is that based on your involvement in detention operations whilst you were in deployment, or is it based on conversations that you've had with other people?
Both.
Or both? So both.
Both.
As to the opinion that you've just explained to us, that what you were being asked to believe simply wasn't credible,
Yeah.
did you express that view to the Secretary of State,
Yes.
to the Director of Special Forces,
Yes.
and the Chief of the General Staff?
Yes.
And when you expressed that view to them, each in turn, what, if anything, was their reaction, Mr. Mercer?
There's no new evidence. There's no new evidence. Tony, there's no new evidence. We've had external validation of this. And I remember saying that this is, you realise this is just not plausible to me, right? This, you know, you're asking me to, I mean, we'll come on to the next bit about people remembering things, but it's just, I don't believe you. You know, what do you want me to do? I don't believe you. I don't believe what you're saying to me.
And in particular, when you don't believe what you're being told about people's memory, could you just help us with what you mean by that, Mr. Mercer?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there was an
28.
investigation into this, and I saw a report where a judge described the
Paragraph 28, I think.
yeah, sure. I'm just looking at the cipher list. Yeah, when he spoke to the UKSF individuals, none of them could remember any detail of any of the operations selected at random, despite the killings of juveniles. That is not credible.
And the judge described it as, I think you were about to say, as collective amnesia.
Correct, sir. And that is not credible. I've been on target when people have been, you know, you never, if I look back to my 2010 tour and I went in March and I came back in October and I was fighting twice a day for every day, of course I'm not going to remember every single contact and every single round I fired, but you do remember usually when people die, and you would particularly remember it if you killed children. It is not credible to sit there and tell me you don't remember killing children.
One of the other items you identify as a layer of implausibility was the fact that the number of persons killed significantly and repeatedly exceeded the number of weapons found on target.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean,
it may be an obvious question, Mr. Mercer.
Yeah.
Why is it that you find that wholly implausible?
Because the whole point of shooting someone dead when you're trying to detain them is that there is no other option available, right? And there is a threat presented to you, and there is no other way of dealing with that threat. And it is a last resort to take the life of that individual, which is an incredibly serious thing, irrespective of their background, nationality, race, religion, or whatever. An incredibly serious thing to take that individual's life. That is a last resort when nothing else is available. So the idea that you would find twice the number of bodies on target than you did weapons would immediately make to me to say, even as a junior commander, I'd be like, what is going on here? And I would, you know, because I can't stress this enough, why I'm so annoyed with the junior commanders and the subunit commanders, is that we never needed to be here today. And, you know, that is in my view, that is you know, it's a crying shame, because this could have been cleared up years ago with facts like that coming out, double the bodies to weapons.
Can I pause you there, Mr. Mercer? There's a matter I believe Mr O'Connor wishes to raise, and I'm so sorry. I do apologise.
I apologise for interrupting, but there's a matter I've been instructed to raise. Can I invite you to make an emergency restriction order of a similar type which you made earlier this afternoon?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr O'Connor. Thank you, Mr O'Connor. Another matter has arisen relating to the transcript. Before I rise, I would like to remind everyone that in these circumstances, everything that has been said in the last 10 minutes of this hearing is now subject to a provisional restriction order pending my further direction. That means that anything said during the last 10 minutes must not be repeated or otherwise communicated until further direction. Any breach of this order may be punished by imprisonment. The live feed will have been stopped, and it has been stopped, I've just been indicated. I'll rise briefly so that a discussion can take place. The court should be cleared, attended only by state court participants, please, and subject matter experts if necessary, so that this issue can be discussed, and I'll return as I did before when called back in. All right, thank you. Clear the court, please. Thank you for drawing that to my attention, Mr. O'Connor. My restriction order will remain in place in relation to everything said from 15:28:00 to 15:35:59 until the transcript is published.
So thank you very much. Mr. Mercer, you'd identified therefore to us a number of concerns about the allegations themselves and the explanation that have been provided to them, concerns about the failure of people to recall what had happened, what a judge had described as collective amnesia, and concerns about the fact that on a number of occasions it appeared that the number of people killed significantly exceeded the number of weapons that had been found on target. Did you raise those concerns with everyone that you could?
I mean, to be honest with you, Mr. Glasgow, I mean, I didn't go around talking about it with everybody I could, and I couldn't tell you, hand on heart, if I raised every single one of those concerns with every single individual. I made it very clear to those relevant individuals, such as the Secretary of State, CGS, CDS, and DSF, of my concerns that encompassed those four clear strands in paragraph 27.
Insofar as you saw the implausibility, as you've described it, as having an impact on anything else you were trying to do, did you consider that there was any need to advise anyone about potential risks to your work if you were being given implausible explanations for things that you thought simply...
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I said to the Secretary of State that, you know, whilst I wasn't a sort of investigator or a police officer, and in some ways, whether I believe these things or not was not relevant in some ways because it wasn't my job. What was relevant was that we were being asked to carry political risk for bringing in legislation that was clearly contentious, and that eventually, when all is said and done with all these issues, the names on the tin for all this stuff come back to the ministers. And it would be me, predominantly, and Ben Wallace, whose names would be around this legislation. And ultimately, if this played out and the legislation came in and we protect all these people from lawfare, but also it was then shown that we couldn't investigate serious allegations like this, that is not, the political risk of that is not acceptable, and it is not something I would try and get to a position of.
And given the implausible explanations that you had been offered for some of the concerns you'd raised, did you have confidence in the ongoing investigation?
I mean, by that stage, I think Northmoor, they decided Northmoor was going to come to an end.
Did you have any confidence that Northmoor's findings would withstand scrutiny?
Well, no, because I gave them a bit of, you know, my deeply unqualified, uneducated scrutiny had been unable to, they hadn't been able to satisfy me, who is, you know, the number one defender of these people. So how on earth was that going to survive contact with the public domain?
So to your mind, the process that had been put in place, was it an effective one or not?
I think they did the best they could with the knowledge and the envelope they were asked to operate in. Yeah, I wouldn't criticise them because unless you knew, for example, that FMV was a go, no-go criteria, you wouldn't stick your hand up and say, why is there literally no platform with any FMV available for any operations selected at random by John Murphy? I do think somebody else should have picked that up. Yeah, of course. But not one of the investigators who was, you know, on the ground doing it. Someone at command level should have thought, there's something not quite right here.
Someone say at DSF level should have pointed it out, do you think?
Well, of course, but, you know, he had seemingly satisfied himself that there was nothing here.
Well, you didn't believe him. I
didn't believe him, no, and I don't know what people want me to do about that. I'm just being honest with you. I didn't believe him. I've never believed that version of events, and I said that to everybody who asked me. I said the same thing in public and in private, that I did not believe the accounts that were presented to me of these operations.
Can I just ask you to look in your statement? Are you still on page 11?
I'm on 10. I'm now on 11.
Paragraph 30. At this stage, although I was very concerned, I maintained my faith in the process that had been set up by the MOD to properly and fully investigate these allegations.
Yeah.
Given what you've just told us a moment ago, can that be right?
Well, I mean, I did have faith in them because, you know, there's lots of context here. You know, when I came into all this and came into politics and came into the department, you know, I came in, you know, initially when you're starting down this track of improving things like veterans care, everyone's very supportive. When you actually get into the weeds of it and you're like, well, you know, people shouldn't really pay for their own prosthetics and stuff like that, you start to hit a bit of resistance and you feel like a bit of an outsider. And that, you know, that then colours your judgment on things like this, because you don't want to be a stick in the mud for every issue. You don't want to be, you know, well, I'm sorry, but I just don't accept this. I had faith in the processes and in what was going on in the Ministry of Defence, and people who were more experienced, more qualified, better officers than me when they were in, and better ministers than me, senior ministers to me at the time. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the professional thing was to put my hand up, say, look, I'm not happy and I don't believe this, but I'm a professional minister and I will go with your direction.
Mr. Mercer, you just told the inquiry that you believe the DSF was lying to you.
I've never said anybody lied to me.
You just said that you didn't believe.
Correct.
You didn't believe what the...
Yeah, and that is different. I've never said anybody lied to me. I've been very clear on that, Mr.
So you didn't believe the DSF when he told you there was no FMV?
I did not believe that there was no FMV available, yep.
But you had faith in the process?
I had faith that maybe I was wrong. I had faith that...
What do you mean?
I guess I had faith that the system and the structure and the organisation was bigger than me. And in some ways, you begin to think, maybe I've got this all wrong.
Can I remind you of what you told the inquiry this morning, Mr. Mercer, and these are your words? I had very little faith that the MOD had the ability to hold itself to account.
Yep.
That's what you said earlier today. How do you square that observation with what is written in your statement, where you profess to have had faith in the process?
Because I had little faith in it, but I felt like I had to have faith in what was going on at the time. Look, at the end of the day, I was the only one calling this out. And at some stage, publicly and at a senior level, and it's, if nobody else thinks there's an issue here, you're left with, a couple of options. One is which you resign and leave. The other is you try and fight through all the other issues you're doing as a politician or as a minister, which I was doing at the time. And I decided that on balance, provided there were no further disclosure issues or information came to boot, that I would just have to swallow this, sit on it. I was a junior minister at the time, and support Secretary of State and DSF and the senior officers in the MOD.
Well,
that was a decision I made at the time.
The Secretary of State had specifically tasked you to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, I came back with my findings, and he decided that we would carry on as we were.
So when you say you came back with your findings, do you mean you reported to him that you believed that what you were being told was utterly implausible? I
said that I did not believe what I was being told, yeah.
And his response to that was what, please, Mr. Mercer?
There is no new evidence. But this has been investigated. John Murphy's had a look at it. I don't know what else we can do, Johnny.
You record in your statement that in late 2019, you were aware of more significantly serious allegations that were being made by the Sunday Times and BBC Panorama in a joint investigation?
Are you referring to paragraph 33?
I am, yes.
Thank you.
The matter that you were concerned about, as had been reported, included a reference to alleged death squads.
Yep.
Have you had a chance to refresh your memory of that?
Yes,
Thank
I'm
you.
ready to go.
Right. What was it about the reporting in late 2019 of allegations that there had been death squads that you didn't accept?
The premise was that I did not believe in a professional unit like that death squads could operate unencumbered. And I did not believe that it could. That was a kind of, you know, there would have to be some degree of turning a blind eye to a level that I didn't really believe could exist. And so I thought those allegations were a step too far. I was very concerned at that stage. I remained very concerned, particularly around the killing of children. And I remember very clearly thinking in my mind at that time, and it was a very difficult time, and, you know, I felt very, very torn as to what I should do. Because ultimately you have to decide what side you're on. You're either on the side of people who, you know, whatever happened on these operations, kids ended up dead, and people are saying they don't remember what happened, or you're going to do the right thing. And as you navigate that, it's not always a straight line.
Well, which side were you on, Mr. Mercer?
I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it?
What, the side to do the right thing?
Well, I'm here today, aren't I?
To tell the truth? To help the inquiry?
I think we've been over this, haven't we?
Insofar as you didn't recognise the allegations being made, did you understand that UKSF were acting to carry out kill or capture missions in Afghanistan?
Look, in my experience, which was limited to what it was, and I don't profess to know everything, and you know, and I had a very ordinary career, so I couldn't have seen everything. But you know, the idea of a kill or capture operation as a defined term was not something I was familiar with. I was familiar with things like deliberate detention operations. I was familiar with kinetic strikes and had carried out a number of kinetic strikes myself in very controlled conditions. The idea that you could land a force on and deliberately kill individuals who pose no threat, that's not a mission I've ever heard of, or indeed sits within regular understanding of the rule of law.
Whilst you were investigating these allegations, did you come to learn that operations had been termed as kill or capture missions?
Well, only after the, if I'm honest, only in the disclosure for this process. So what happened was there was this story, and I think it was Panorama that started talking about kill or capture operations. I believe at that time I said there's no such thing as a kill or capture operation. You know, it's either a DDO or a kinetic strike. Yeah, as separate. So you could have kill missions, which are kinetic strikes, or you could have capture operations. But you don't just turn up and kill everyone.
Do you agree that you are now familiar with documentation, because it's been provided to you by the inquiry, which identifies missions as having been kill or capture missions?
It would appear that that terminology has crept in, yes, but that's not something I was familiar with at the time. I believe it's an Americanism that has crept into UKSF parlance.
I'm not asking where you think it has come from. I'm asking whether you now accept that you have been provided with documentation from UKSF which describes their operations as kill or capture missions. Do you accept that or not?
I mean, I think I've seen that verb used on, or those verbs used as a title of a PowerPoint deck of slides that would have been an O group. I haven't seen it in proper staff work sort of doctrine for UKSF, no.
So we can
as
agree,
far as I can recall.
We can agree at least that you have seen presentations prepared by UKSF in which the author has described the operation as being a kill or capture mission.
Yeah, sure. I'd have to come back to you on that.
Well, if it's something that you weren't aware of before you read that disclosure, it must have been something that jarred with you.
Of course. And when I saw it,
so you did see
it. I remember, I mean, I was provided with these disclosure documents, and I'm happy to have a look at them again and to bring them out, that showed a set of slides that talked about these operations, and I think that had kill or capture on it, but I may be incorrect. And I remember seeing that, and that was something that did not chime with my experiences, yeah.
Insofar as your experiences are concerned, can I ask, please, that a passage from your book, in particular in chapter 10, is brought up, and you'll find it on the screen. It's the easiest way to look for it, Mr. Mercer.
Yeah.
I was housed in the very comfortable SF compounds named after an operator who'd been killed the summer before on a counter-terrorist operation. It's always difficult joining a close-knit team, particularly on operations, but this group of individuals made me feel entirely welcome. My role was to be very fluid. The guy before me had seemingly got the pizzas and coffees in when an operation went into the early hours. I was keen to play a far more active part, and early on it was made clear to me that the opportunity was there to do so. Al-Qaeda and the Taliban were very much an interchangeable title at the time, although the Al-Qaeda influence in Afghanistan was nowhere near what it was in Iraq. These terrorist networks established themselves very much like any other organisation that has organisations that have a hierarchy of power and pursue their aims ruthlessly. The task force's specific job was to kill or capture as many of the Taliban Al-Qaeda leadership within the country as possible. They were directing a campaign of terror and intimidation on the local populations and hounding the International Security Assistance Force operating on behalf of the NATO mission with a daily wave of bombings and shootings. We would spend most of our days trying to find the targets before deciding on a time and place for an attempted detention. In almost all cases, these individuals resisted strongly, and attempted detentions became killings. It would be inappropriate to outline the methods employed.
Yeah.
So here you've described the specific job of the SF unit that you had joined as being to kill or capture as many of the Taliban Al-Qaeda leadership as possible.
Yeah.
So kill or capture is how you've actually termed their overall role.
Right, no, so you're mixing two things. A kill-capture operation is a mission verb, right? Kill-capture as one entity. What that says there was to kill, i.e. in kinetic strikes, or capture in DDOs as many of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda leadership that we could. So they're two separate issues.
So the DDOs that certainly you were involved in whilst you were deployed were missions to detain individuals.
Of course, yeah.
but missions which you observed in the section that I've just read, in many cases where individuals resisted strongly and attempted detentions became killings.
Yeah, so when attempted detentions, the guys went on target and the whole world opened up. Clearly, there was, as a gun, people are resisting detention, then the whole thing's going to escalate. But the idea wasn't to go in there and just kill them straight away. Otherwise, you wouldn't risk and everything and everything associated with it. Okay. I'm sorry, sir. I do think that it's an over.
So the simplest thing is simply to make an order to restrict the last 2 minutes, and that can be done pending the publication of the transcripts.
Thank you, Mr. Mercer. I make a restriction order restricting publication of the last 2 minutes of the transcript or anything that's been said in court in the last 2 minutes on the same terms as I did before. I don't think it's necessary then to rise, since I think the position is well understood. Mr. O'Connor, is that right? Indeed. Good. And thank you, Mr. Mercer, for raising that.
Sorry.
These things inevitably arise from time to time. The intention of the inquiry, as you know, is to hold as much in public as possible, but of course there are bumps and scrapes along the way. Thank you.
So in addition, we'll need to cut the feed because whilst there is of course a 10-minute delay, the passage that's just been given in evidence will inevitably be played in about 7.5 minutes from now.
There is a 10-minute lead, of course, and we'll need to cut the feed so it doesn't go outside this court. So this is an afternoon of probably welcome breaks, another tea break. Let's do that. Call me back, please. Thank you. Mr. Glasgow, I gather there have been some discussions, and the general consensus is that it's been a long day, particularly for the shorthand writers, and that it may be sensible now to, given the hour, 4:30, to draw stumps for today.
So yes, I'm not confident that if we began now, I'd conclude the evidence in time for everyone to get out through the gate before 5 o'clock.
Although I didn't tell everybody, I do have a pass to the side gate because we could stay till midnight.
Mr. Mercer has discussed the matter with his legal team, and he has kindly made himself available for us first thing tomorrow morning, so he could return at 10 o'clock. And we've made arrangements for Mark Nichol to be contacted so that his evidence will start, we anticipate, at 11:30, which will allow Mr. Mercer's evidence to conclude within about an hour, and then this will be a break in the morning before we turn to the next chapter of evidence.
Mr. Mercer, that's very helpful. Thank you. We'll break now until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody, for your attention today, and particularly to the shorthand writers and the court staff. Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming today to give your evidence. I repeat the same warning that I do to all witnesses. Please don't discuss your evidence with anybody overnight, unless it's on the topic that your counsel discussed with you over lunch. Anything else I need to deal with, Mr. Glasgow?
No, thank you, sir.
Good. Thank you all. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, please.